Hey, what's up, everybody? Wardrobe here. Looks like we have Hex to Hex. He says he's first, but Kent says he's been here for over an hour. And then we got Mike saying he's been in and out of here for 3 days. So, I'm going to let you all fight amongst yourselves who's here, who's not here first. But I appreciate you three being here on the up to go here. It shows we have 0 viewers, but then you got the comments. So maybe you all left. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking to myself, which I'm used to doing. So that's cool. All right, so what are we doing today? Well, today I was super fortunate to get just like perfect timing, and he could do it today, which is incredible that it's happening today. We are, I'm talking to Tom Holliday, lead designer developer. He can clarify all this, the things I get wrong here when I bring him up here, for GTS Utah. Okay, so Mike is here. Thanks, Mike. And we're just I have like 4 to 5 hours worth of questions for him, but he said we could stick around for a couple maybe, but so I got to be careful here. Oh no, Kent, all your modules are gone. That's interesting. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe Mike can. So Mike is a play tester. He's been playing GTS for a million years. Gosh, Mike, I think you got online with me once and tried to teach me when it took me 50 years to learn this game. Okay, so I'm going to get over. Let's get to the point of this whole show. We'll be right back. All right, here we go, everybody. It's Tom Holliday. So welcome, Tom. Thank you so much for coming on. Your first appearance on Wardrobe Plays World War II. Appreciate you coming in. So, I told Tom that, we should do like a little, like, who are you? What do you do? What's your gaming background? But I told him, I don't care because I got 4 hours of questions. We might do another show where we get to know Tom a lot better, and he'll sprinkle things in. Let me just sprinkle one of these things in that he just shared with me. So, Tom, you have a little project going on with a house, and can you kind of just tell the kind of the one feature that you're hoping goes into this house if it all comes to fruition there?
Well, one of the things that my wife was nice enough to allow me to build into the house, or at least into the design, is a game room, which will be the first true game room that I've had. But the designing feature for that was an area large enough to put all 3 of the Greatest Day games linked together on one table. So we'll see how that plays out, but it is large enough to do that, although but that is one of the designs for the new house.
If that doesn't tell you his commitment to GTS and Normandy, I don't know what would, because that's awesome. And I hope that comes to fruition. And I cannot wait to see pictures of that when it happens. So that's pretty cool. But he's got a ways to go on that project. He has another huge house project he built, and it's called GTS Utah. You can kind of see it above my head there. You can see it behind me here at the Greatest Day. That's the Commonwealth beaches over there. And then we got Utah coming up, which is pretty cool. It's been a long time in the going. We've seen little tidbits and secrets about it. Not secrets, but photos of it being play tested for years. What I wanted to bring Tom on here is just to kind of give some, more insight into them beyond the description that is in the MMP site, which I meant to pull up and I forgot. But so we'll get it. Basically, it's still on pre-order, but MMP has indicated that it's they're collecting the stuff, they're assembling boxes, and they're going to start shipping in maybe 1 to 2 weeks. But that is not anything, because it's me saying it and not MMP officially. Even Tom is not the official word on that because he doesn't control that. So, but it could happen soon. So if you're interested at all, now's a good time to get it, because it is, I think it's 250 something pre-order and 323 something. I'm kind of making numbers up here, but pretty close. It's a big game. It's an expensive game. I get it. But there's a lot of game here, and that's one thing we're going to talk about. So let's start out, Tom. This is how we're going to get to know you. Why Utah? Why GTS? Why you? Go. I'm just going to sit back and listen.
So Normandy has always been one of my two most interested battles, the areas that I've focused most of my military knowledge on, that and Gettysburg. Um, a lot of that comes from my ancestry. My grandfather actually jumped with the 82nd into Normandy. And I was telling Todd earlier, if I can get my finger in the right place, that photo right there is a picture of him in England, either just prior to Normandy or just after they got back. I don't know the date on the actual photo, but I do know it is from England, and that's the only time he was in England.
Mm,
Um, so I've always had an interest in Normandy. Any Normandy game that I can get my hands on, I've done that. I was a playtester for Sword Juno Gold, and got to talking to Adam Starkweather at that point about what was next, which he had already kind of decided Utah would be the next one. I must admit, I kind of finagled my way into being part of that team. And then when he left, MMP asked me to take on that project as the lead designer. And so it was a good fit to keep going with the GTS series because, as I've already said, I'm building a table that will have the entire Normandy game on it. So it helps to stay in the system. Um, but the history, the ability to connect both to my ancestry and then just the monumental battle itself, and then the love of gaming, which gives me all three of those all in one. So it was really just kind of the right fit for me.
okay. What so before GTS, did you have a favorite Normandy D-Day game that you liked playing?
I played The Longest Day for quite a while. That was one of my favorites. I actually had that up on a table for almost a year, to the point where the Germans are now pink because they actually do fade in the sun,
Oh my
which I
gosh.
wasn't smart enough to close the blinds, not knowing that that would occur.
Whoops.
But that's all right. It helps verify which units they are now.
I think it makes it more clear. I've never seen that in person. I'd love to see it. It's one of those games that'd be like, it'd be fun to own, but I'm like, Um, I don't know if this is for you or what this is for, but I just want to throw this up there real quick. I don't know if that's something someone knows, but anyway, there you go. That's it. So we got Bill Spear, Rep Mike Curtis, Kent is in the house. I think some of these guys are GTS guys. Real quick, I hope he's on here.
All three of those are play testers for this game as well.
Okay. Well, hey guys, if they're while we're going here, appreciate you coming on. You see questions in the chat or something that you can answer, please feel free to answer, where it's not those not limited to Tom or I to answer questions like that. Well, that's a pretty cool story about, especially, I'm sorry, you said your father, is that right, or grandfather? Grandfather. Okay. So my grandfather served in World War II in Europe. He didn't get there till November. His unit, 12th Armored Division. So it adds a lot to your research and stuff when it's someone that a little bit close to home. So that's pretty cool. Oh well, why GTS? Like, why that system? I mean, not just for Utah, but kind of like why do you like it so much?
So I was able to pick up the Devil's Cauldron when it first came out. A good friend of mine and I played it. Really, just kind of fell in love with the system. There's several aspects that I find different but intriguing to other game systems. One of which, and anyone that's played GTS, I know the mantra, bowling for zeros. But the other aspect to that is the higher end of the combat results table, where you're really trying to do everything in your power to set the right conditions to get the best option. And then what you really don't want is a zero. That's not the best option. If you do it right, the better options are at the higher end of the scale. But you
Right.
can only do those if you play correctly and get the right modifiers. And so you're constantly wanting a different die roll instead of always wanting sixes or always wanting ones, or it modifies your thought process every time you roll the die.
Gotcha.
Obviously, sometimes your only option is to roll a 0, but again, if you've got the right conditions, you really want something other than that, and I like that aspect of it. I also like the chit pull, which makes it a little more random, because war is not a static capability. There is an awful lot of randomness to it, and that adds a feel that allows players to have some of that anticipation or that anxiety, even though minor compared to the soldiers that were fighting the battle. It does give a feel that I don't get in a lot of other games. So those were two of the bigger reasons that I really fell in love with the GTS system.
Okay. And I guess I should ask now that you've this. So everybody, he informed me before. This is his first game design.
Yes.
So it's obviously his first GTS.
Now,
Do you? Oh, go ahead.
I will tell you, I've come to the conclusion that every game player is a designer, just not everyone's a published designer.
Yeah.
And I can't add myself into that category just yet.
Well, that's true. You're not quite there yet, but getting close. So do you still like the GTS system after 8? What do you
Yes.
How long have you been working on this? I've seen stuff for 8 years, or I've seen
comments. This one has been in design for quite a while, and obviously with Adam leaving the project and me getting up to speed, and granted at the time I was active duty in the military, so not all my time could be spent on game design, obviously. So there was a lot of slowdown at the beginning, and it's picked up in the last 2 or 3 years where, and arguably some of that slowdown is a new designer not understanding how pieces fit together, not understanding the things you probably should be doing first so that you can set conditions for later, and so on and so on. So there was a learning curve for me as well. But
yeah,
to your real point, it's been over 10 years.
Yeah. So do you? Well, I'll save that question for the end. I think I'll ask this now. So I was watching the 2 Squad, which is a show about advanced squad leader. A couple guys out of Chicago do that show. They've been doing it for a million years. And they were asking a couple guys that designed a historical ASL game called Festoon Budapest. So it's just a huge, Budapest thing into the war situation. And then they also just designed Twilight of the Reich, another huge thing. And one of the guys said an interesting thing. So I wanted to ask you this. He said that, I mean, these are like not pro, but whatever, high level ASL players, which obviously is a big thing. Right. And they said, but it's amazing what you don't know when you start designing designing this, because it's how to design, because they had to design the maps, especially they do geo boards. Some of them were fake maps, right? Whatever. But
right.
He goes, we thought we knew the game well, because it's amazing what we didn't know. And as we started designing, so I wanted to ask you, did you come across that when you were designing this? Like,
Yes.
GTS, but
I would say I'm proficient at GTS, but I also learn every time I play. There's new aspects of how to do something, not necessarily by the rules. You can read those and understand those, but how to apply it in a manner that's beneficial or gives you an advantage. I'm learning all the time, and several of the guys that are on this line have taught me multiple things over the last several years.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Can you remember something that you learned while designing? Like, I never really knew that's how that worked or something, or?
That's a good question. Well, one of the things that's going to be prominent in this game, and we had to discuss it with several of the playtesters on several occasions, the coastal artillery or emplaced artillery, depending on what version of the rules you're reading. They're all the same, black firepower.
Okay.
Those units fire at naval ships. That's what they're designed for.
Okay.
But they also have the ability to fire as normal artillery. Well, as we were looking at it, we were saying, well, how do you go back and forth between these two? And you're not allowed to do both in the same turn, or at least not allowed to do it on the same activation, obviously, because the one is only during the naval sequence of fire. The other is during normal activation turns. So one of the things that we started looking into was, how do we write the rules to allow that to occur? And after several weeks, honestly, of trying to figure this out, we stepped back and said, well, wait a second, if we just apply the rules the way they're written, does that work? And amazingly enough, it handled every situation that you could face to try and move back and forth between those two types of indirect fire. So if you're not in contact with a leader, you're a coastal artillery battery. You can fire during the naval sequence of play. But if you are in contact with a leader, you are a field artillery piece. You cannot fire during the naval sequence of play. But the interesting thing to the rules that allows both sides to stay on their toes, a leader can drop contact voluntarily now. That was a change that was made to the rules about 5 years ago. And that is in the 2.0 C series rules. That's one way you can lose contact. So if a leader decides during the naval sequence of play, if I haven't been barraged, which would prevent me from shooting at a ship, I can give up contact and fire during the naval sequence of play. Now, I can't take it back and turn it into a field artillery piece again until the next turn when I have to roll for contact. But the Americans, or well, in this case, the Americans, but the Allies, really, in order to protect their ships, are going to have to barrage those coastal batteries, whether they're in contact with a leader or not. So it all kind of fit together in the end, but it was unexpected, because I thought we had a serious problem that we had to figure out how to solve. And really the solution was read the rules again and understand them properly.
That's hilarious. Yeah, dude, just read the rules. So Mike mentioned here that you have some great Utah stories. And I guess one thing that would be interesting as you're going through this stuff, if there's a story you can remember, I mean, I'm asking you to do a lot of stuff here. If there's a story you can remember, like, oh yeah, there was an example of that kind of thing happening, like, you know, the artillery and the coastal batteries and all that. Because I think that's always a fascinating thing to me, is about design. Like, okay, why did they do that? Why is that in there? And, you know, usually there's an example or something. Do you have in this case?
So in that, using that same example, and it is still undetermined by history, depending on who you talk to, which historian you talk to. There's at least one U.S. destroyer that was sunk off Utah Beach. The question is, was it sunk to a German naval mine, or was it sunk due to coastal artillery? Again, I don't know that there's a good solution to that, but that means that there's a possibility that coastal artillery did impact the ships. So obviously you want to make sure that's included. It was already in the rules. That was easy. But the other thing that I didn't really know is, until I started doing a lot of research for this, Utah Beach was under fire from German artillery basically the entire day of June 6th. So you had to have a way to have artillery continuing to rain in, and your mobile artillery, mobile being a relative term, horse-drawn for most of the German units, usually either close or where the airborne dropped. So they're not really an option. But the coastal batteries that can, I think the largest one is La Prunelle, which is 66 hexes of range. You're not going to have to worry about losing that particular battery on June 6th. But if it's in contact with a leader, it can fire at the beach or just off the beach on the causeways all day long. So it allowed both of those options that are historically, you know, they're facts, to be involved in the game.
Okay. I want to get something real quick here. So Commando, I feel like Commando, you might have asked this question before on another stream here, but so yeah. One thing I'm getting ready to talk about, like I said, the price for this, I looked it up. It's $249 plus shipping. It'll be $332 after. You could probably find it in retail and like an online store, probably a little cheaper than that, you know, after it's published, but who knows, but you probably can. I would be hard pressed to say this is a good starting point only because of the volume and size, but we're going to talk about the scenarios here real shortly. So in some ways, yeah, it could be because there's a lot of scenarios in this, but a good one to start out with maybe is, can't really see it.
Strike, counter strike.
Bagged game. Strike, counter strike. I put it in a box. It doesn't come in a box, but it's a one mapper. Everything, many of the charts are on the map. So you don't have to have a bunch of stuff. It's your table's not taken up. It's just a 22 by whatever the standard 22 by 34, whatever the standard size is. It's really good. The magazine's really good. Ignore the articles by Ty. They're terrible. I'm just kidding. He's not on here. I shouldn't say that. But anyway, they're great. I mean, it's really good. And it's what? I'll say, I don't know what the price is, but it's not $250. So, but
and that particular game, Joe Chacon was the designer. And he is also one of the designers for Utah. So there's actually 3 designers for this game. But he designed Strike Counter Strike specifically as an entry level GTS game.
Yep. So I would recommend that one easily. I would recommend any of the big ones, especially as they go. The guys, the team are learning. Like the very first game, Devil's Cauldron. I think they're adding more scenarios because they know people want more and stuff. So yes and no. I'm not answering your question. Sorry, Commando, but
now,
yes and no. Hey,
I
Murray,
will tell you, yeah. So most of the games, I know Gold Juno Sword and Utah Beach both have learning scenarios, which are very small, 1 to 2 turn games or scenarios. I think in Utah Beach, there's 2 learning scenarios. Officially, it's 1 scenario, but there's the scenario plus you can add additional units if you want to make it a little more challenging. But I think it's 2 turns and 14 to 15 units per side. So it's a very small, the map itself is on an 11 by 17 map.
That's nice.
So, and actually I can bring up,
that'd be good. Yeah.
Let me get the right map image.
So while he's doing that, let me just kind of briefly, this is a good time to talk about the game. Super high level. I'm going to leave some stuff out. Go to mmpgamers.com. I'm not getting anything from them to do this. This is all because I'm crazy and want to talk to this guy, but the people who design this kind of stuff, I have so many questions about the design process. But basically, it's all about Utah. Really quick, GTS, high level. Most people here probably know this, but I'm going to be super high level. Company level. So each counter is a company. It's 2-hour turns generally. And it's a chit pull, as was mentioned. Why is this different than other chit pull games? This allows you to purchase some at each turn. Some are always in, and some you purchase. And so there's a point system that you have to manage, a little bit of economy, if you call it that, from turn to turn. So it makes the longer games more interesting because you got to kind of plan ahead. It's like Supply or something. It's not called that, but that's how I envision it. This game is going to come, and so that's kind of high level. D10. The combat is pretty straightforward. There's some modifiers up and down. And after you play for 6-hour days, which I was doing here in St. Louis with Ty, I forgot how to do math for 1s and 2s, but it's pretty, the modifiers are pretty easy. So this is going to come with the rules, the exclusive rules, some scenario booklets, 3 of them, 16 and a half counter sheets. So that's getting your money's worth right there. 5/8 counters. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 maps, and then some are double-sided, some are not, because some of the scenarios, as he said, come on smaller maps, and a couple of 8.5 by 11 overlay things. Let's see, CRT, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and then 4 10-sided dice and 1 6-sided dice. So that's kind of the high level of what comes in it, how GTS works. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. There's a lot of great videos out there that talk about how to play. Lee Forrester did some really good ones. Let me see here what else I want to cover on that. Okay, so we are going to talk about the scenarios. I'm going to just run through this real quick. Tom just shared like the list of the scenarios, and they look awesome, but I'm going to let him kind of talk about them. But there's 2 learning. Again, Tom, correct me. Intro, there's 4. So introduction scenarios, which are pretty I'm pretty good scenarios for learning. So I'd say there's right there, there's six scenarios that you can play, and kind of figure things out. Intermediate, 6. I said 6.5 because there's some little modifications on one, which is cool. 3 advanced and 5 campaign. So pretty cool. I got 19 or 20, give or take, scenarios, which is pretty cool. I mean, that's a lot. And with Chit Pull, every play is different. So, all right. So Tom wants to share something. Let me add this to the stage, and I'm just going to make it solo so we don't have to see as much as possible there.
And I can zoom in, but essentially this entire map is with the border is 11 by 17. This is the Saint Marie de Mont learning scenario map. So both of the 2 learning scenarios can be played on this Battle for Breakcourt Manor and Battle of the Batteries, because little known, mainly because it was destroyed so quickly, is the Holdy Battery, which was a sister unit to Breakcourt Manor, which actually, even in the game, is on one of the drop zones. And so the airborne literally just assaulted it as they landed. That was the 101st that did that. So you can either play it as the smaller scenario, just the one battery Breakcourt Manor, which is well known from Band of Brothers, or you can play it with both German batteries and have a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, that's.
But it has all of the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I love the maps in GTS. Even when I wasn't playing, I loved them. I mean, they're just great maps. Scooby do these or who?
Yeah, Nico did all the maps.
So yeah, I mean, just now this is going to be interesting because this is not on the, as far as I know, for the most part. Well, no, I guess there are some. The swamps and flooded areas. Oh boy, that'll be fun to mess with. You don't have to mess with it.
Yeah, so we there were marsh in Sword Juno Gold.
Yeah.
But one of the things we had to add and change for Utah, there's actually 3 additional terrain types. One is and I'll let me see if I can do this right. I'll zoom in. So you've got Utah Beach that's over here. I hope you can see my cursor.
Yep. I see your hand. Yep.
There were 4 causeways. The first one being just off the south of the map down here, a little bit further down. Right here, Causeway 2, Causeway 3, and I don't believe Causeway 4 is on this particular map. It's not.
Okay.
It is on the campaign map. But this entire area behind Utah Beach was flooded by the Germans. It had to do with the dams and the lock system. And not only was the area directly behind the beaches flooded, but then several of the rivers, both the Douve and the Merdere, also had large flooded areas. In fact, one of the primary areas for the 82nd's drop was near the Lafayette Bridge, which has almost a 500-meter field. And if you go there today, it's a river that's maybe 10 meters wide, the Merdere at that point.
Wow.
And then 500 meters of field. Well, there's actually a causeway because in the wintertime it floods, or when the Germans prevent the water from draining, it floods. The Americans didn't really realize that when they jumped in, or at least before they jumped in, because they weren't taking photo reconnaissance at night. So when you jump out at night and look down and see the moon reflecting off the water, you really start to wonder if you're actually in the English Channel or if you're still over land. And so there were quite a few casualties, even though it's not terribly deep. It didn't matter with the weight of the equipment they had, or the fact that when you're in that situation and start to, I'll say, panic, you don't realize that if you just stand up, you actually are taller than the water is deep. But it's perfectly understandable how, a lot of paratroopers drowned in those flooded areas, because they didn't realize what they were jumping into.
Yeah, it's nighttime and you're disoriented and it's crazy. So everybody, 2,900 counters. Is that enough? That's a lot of counters. Now, this is a good question from Commando, asking the good stuff. Design question: why did you go? Now I know this is kind of a standard series thing, but it's a good question. Why did you go with hex stars, as he's calling them, instead of full hex overlays? It's a good question.
So in a lot of cases with the design for this game, as a first time designer, I had it easy, to be honest, because this is not only in the GTS series, but it's also in the greatest day grouping of games. The things that I had to do was try to stay true to the games that had come before, which meant that a lot of the design decisions were already made. So, from a map perspective, this was something that was also one of the things that drew me to GTS. As Todd mentioned, the maps are just unbelievably beautiful. Um, the the hex corners with a center dot that tells you what the actual hex terrain is allows you, if you kind of stand back and get that 50,000 foot level, to see what really looks like just a map of the ground, or aerial photography. But if you kind of get a little bit closer and you start looking, the eye will pick up the hexes even without the hex lines there. And
Yeah,
so it's still easily playable, and arguably, and I think Mike is probably the only one, maybe Bill and Kent, that were playtesting with me when I had my version of the playtest map, which will never see the light of day again. It was a PowerPoint version that took me almost a year to create, and it is just god awful ugly. But again, because of the way you play this game, the hex dot in the middle tells you everything you need, and it had that capability. And so we were able to play test on it and do some of the rudimentary play testing before Nico could get us an actual reasonably looking map to play test on.
yeah. I would say that is a thing that I kind of wish more games did, was this center dot thing, because that way you don't have to worry about, am I hitting the forest or the thing, or am I no, man, what's the dot say? What's the dot say? It's a fantastic way. I think the last question I want to send on kind of this big overview thing is kind of the overall campaign. So if you can pull up that overall map that you
Yep.
showed me earlier, that was a
That would
question
be
that
that
Commando
one.
had.
Did that start sharing that, or do I need to share that
Let me
particular?
remove that. No, I don't see anything. Oh,
Okay.
oh, no, that's the same map. So let me remove that. All right. So while he's doing that, let's see here if there's any other comments via Facebook. Awesome answer. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome, Commando. Yeah, it's great to hear the guys that helped to design this and do that. Okay. So, Commander, you asked the question, and this is a question that everyone asks with any of these monster games. Like, okay, am I going to have to build a new house like someone over here to play this game? So here's the whole, let me actually make it solo so it's bigger. So here's the whole shooting match here. So this is the whole thing for the campaigns. Now, a lot of those scenarios we talked about, I'm going to just make an assumption. Tom, correct me. You're only going to need one map, maybe part of two or something. So there's a lot of games. I think these scenarios you're going to be able to play without this much space. Like you may not even be able to set this up in your house, and that's a I know there's still a lot of game. Go ahead, Tom. So how big is this generally?
So this is roughly 5.5 by 6.5 feet. 5.5 top to bottom, 6.5 left to right. It was originally designed to be on a 6 foot table because that made sense. And that's when the map 9, the Briekebeck map, was actually two 8.5 by 11 sheets, or maps. But as we were playtesting, we realized there were areas that really were pushing the Germans up against the edge of the map and somewhat ahistorical in the way that they had to play. So we realized we had to expand that a little bit. So the Briekebeck map is actually an 11-inch by 34-inch map. So it got a few inches wider than we originally anticipated.
Okay. So 6.5 by 5.5. That is your answer. So like he told me, I'm like, dang it. So I got a 6x4 board here. I can make some stuff fit. But the likelihood of me really setting this up in my house and playing the whole thing, pretty unlikely. I got to be real honest, because there's just time and people and and all that stuff. But we will be playing this, I think, at a little convention here sometime, maybe next year. So, this kind of leads us into my next area I want to talk about, and that's kind of the broad design of this particular module. And I think I'm going to start with my third question. So how do you narrow down the size or expand the size? You kind of mentioned one reason you expanded the size is because during playtesting you kind of ran across some things. Maybe you can give more examples of that. So why do you go from 1 map to 10 maps or whatever the number of maps is? How do you, like, the fighting area, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So one of the design challenges with Utah, or with the Greatest Day series, the original game, Sword Juno Gold, covered 3 beaches, and they're all next to each other, one contiguous area. Great. You get a lot of options there. Wonderful. Then the designer at the time, Adam, decided that we should go to Utah, mainly because there was an awful lot of action that doesn't get a lot of visibility when it comes to Normandy in general. You have airborne operations. You've obviously got the seaborne operations. There were a lot of options there. So which something I would not have wanted to do, but it is what we did. We went from one side of Normandy to the other side of Normandy and bookended Omaha, which means that if we've done it right, and I tell you yet, when we build Omaha, it will fit nicely in between the two. And that I spent a lot of time trying to verify exactly how the maps would lay out for the entire Normandy campaign, to try and make sure that that works right. But the only time I'll know that that does work correctly is once we have Omaha and we can lay all 3 of them out together. So once we moved over, and I'll tell you, let me see if I can get back into this. So the Assigny map is essentially this portion here. It's a standard map, 22 inches by 34 inches.
Okay.
Arguably, this whole portion of the map is not necessarily needed for Utah. But if we've done it right, this whole map, this portion in here was fought over by units from Omaha and units from Utah. So we needed this portion for Utah. We'll need it for Omaha. So if we've done it right, this map will be a duplicate in Omaha.
That's cool.
And it will all fit together properly. Again, I am highlighting the fact of if I have done it right, and I won't know that until we put it all together. So that kind of formed one portion of the map. Then a couple of the other design decisions, coming up north, I looked at where were the Allies on the 13th of June, because Sword Juno Gold, since we're following the model there, is a 6 through 13 June campaign game.
Okay.
So in theory, the campaign game for Utah should be 6 through the night of 5 June through 13 June. So I placed, drew on the map exactly where history says the Allies had advanced by the 13th of June. And that got up to Maltberg, actually gets up a little bit north of Maltberg. Let me go back to the actual map. So I'm pointing, sorry. So, you actually, Maltberg is right here, but the Maltberg map is this whole piece.
Okay.
Quinville, this area was captured up to this river, on the 13th. Valone was not, but Valone is the largest city in the Cotentin Peninsula until you get up to Cherbourg. So we added this little piece almost as a stretch goal for the Allies. It didn't modify the outside image of the map. It's an 8.5 by 11 edition. It's not included in every scenario, but obviously the full campaign, it's in there. So that's how Valone got in there, just because it's a good stretch goal for the Allies. You've got Carentan down here. Obviously, you couldn't do Normandy or at least Utah and the 101st without Carentan. St. Mary Glees up here, almost in the middle of the area. But there was an awful lot of fighting here. And by the 13th, they had actually captured Saint Savoir le Vicomte. They had not cut the Cotentin Peninsula. That actually doesn't occur until about the 18th of June. However, the other aspect that added this portion of the map or made it more of a necessity in my mind was most people don't know that the airborne landings that occurred were actually not the planned or originally planned airborne landings. Everyone knows if you've read anything about Normandy how dispersed the landings were, but the actual plan up until the 24th of May 19, literally 12 days before the invasion, was to drop the 82nd over here, the 101st here, and then land with the 4th Infantry, essentially cutting the entire peninsula on the first day.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
What the Americans realized in May is the 91st Luftland Division had been stationed here in April and was essentially dead in the middle of where the airborne was going to land. So, like I said, about 12 days before the invasion, they changed the entire airborne operation and landed the 82nd here and the 101st here so that it was much tighter up against Utah Beach. But because it was that close, we wanted the option to have, and they are considered hypothetical scenarios because they weren't the historical. But honestly, that was a decision that had to be made by Eisenhower with Bradley's recommendation not to follow the original airborne plan because they were that late in preparations. Okay. So the entire air armada had to be altered in the routes and everything that it was going to take and where it was going to drop. All of that had to be done in the last 2 weeks before the invasion.
Okay. So yeah, I was going to, so you set the days so that all the 3 games will tie up and go from the 5th to the 13th. That's cool. Makes Correct. Sense. So Commando kind of asked this question. It kind of ties in with what, I mean, it ties in perfectly with what we're talking about here. You know, when you're designing the game, is the idea that the Allies get to a certain place each day based on where they were in real life or hold back a little. So I guess the question I have for you is tied to that is, can you kind of just like, where broadly, and you might have said this while you were talking, and I'm sorry if I missed it, where were they broadly trying to get? Were they trying to get to the coast over here in the 8 days? And where did they end up? Where was reality?
So originally, the plan was Utah's whole goal was to take Cherbourg.
And what time frame?
As soon as possible. But then Monty's plan was to take Caen on June 6th, which didn't happen for almost 30 days. So you know, obviously, as anyone who's been around the military knows, no plan survives first contact. So, you know, that was never going to happen. But what changed in the way things were occurring is I don't believe the Allies truly felt the Germans were going to fight to hold Cherbourg as tightly as they did. And in fact, that was a Hitler decision of we're not giving up ground, so you're going to die there. So there were multiple units that were actually stranded on the Cotentin Peninsula and cut off, died, or were captured. There are a few that probably never made it up to the senior leadership, specifically up to Hitler's level, that were allowed to escape from the Cotentin Peninsula as the Allies were trying to segregate it and cut it off completely. But somewhere around the 8th or 9th of June, based on how the defenses were starting to form, the Allies decided it would be better to cut the peninsula, knowing that they weren't going to take Cherbourg quickly, and then essentially give them the option of starving it out while they continued to advance. So, you know, the original plan with 4th Infantry Division, and this is what they did, was they landed and turned north. Their goal was to try and get to Cherbourg.
Okay.
That this is a piece that's beyond Utah Beach, so forgive me if I'm getting the dates wrong, but that occurred in late June,
Okay.
mid-20s, somewhere in that range when
Okay.
Cherbourg actually fell. It
Okay.
may have been a few days later than that. The It's interesting. I can see my cursor moving on the actual map. So let me see, because I've also got a cursor on my screen, so I've got to make sure I'm using the correct one.
There
Um,
you go. Now it's moving.
so yeah, so I should be right on Utah Beach right now if what you're
Yep.
seeing, I think.
Yep.
So yes, it did, Mike. Um, it is one of the scenarios. Sorry, Todd. I probably preempted you, but I saw the question come up. So
Yeah.
cut the coat and tin is one of the
Yeah. No, that's
scenarios
cool.
that's in
Yeah.
there.
I put that up there. So,
And go ahead.
um, so, so Commando's question, and this is kind of true about most war games. You're almost always trying to beat the history. So like I want to make it further, do better than the commanders did, and the Germans want to do the same, So that's kind of always the goal. It is always nice to know what that is. It's kind of interesting to know,
Yeah.
like, hey, they took I can't pronounce any of these names, but Ballon, they took that in 7th of June at 4 p.m. Cool. Let me try to beat that or at least tie it. But
Right.
it may not fit to what you're doing. A question I have, and um, I'm just going to say it bluntly, and I don't mean this. What does the German player kind of do? Because it seems pretty like
So
what?
that's another piece I really like, and I think it started with Sword Juno Gold. I don't remember it being part of the Greatest Day or Where Eagles Dare in the same manner, but the objective system that was designed for Sword Juno Gold and was followed on in Utah is, depending on the scenario, is designed to either give the historical objectives. And so, for instance, One Great Day, which is the 1 day campaign, the scenario or the objectives for the 82nd and 101st are literally the objectives that they were given in their operations order. So, whether that be capture St. Mary-Glise, capture the Lafayette Bridge and the Chef de Paul Bridge, destroy the bridge at, let me see if I can get this correct, the bridge at Point l'Abbé,
Okay.
which did not happen, but that was one of their objectives for
Okay.
D-Day. So we use those to help craft what the division commander, i.e. the player, because invariably, although we have formations and regimental brigade size, conf group size units that are the units that play on the leadership scale on the map, the player is actually playing the part of a division commander, commanders.
Right.
So the objectives are designed around what the division needs to accomplish in order to be successful. In some instances, if it's a longer scenario, we would look at what was the history and where should you reasonably expect this division to have gotten to, and then design the objectives around that. Now, I'll let you in on a little design secret that I had to learn as I was doing this. The other nice thing about that is the designer can actually use the objectives to drive the players, not necessarily to play historically, not force them to do exactly what their historical counterparts did. But if you want to get more points and actually win the scenario, you have to do it somewhat historically. So you can't just go off on a wild ride wherever you want. You can, but by the victory conditions, you're probably not going to win that scenario. And one instance that we learned through playtesting, the 6th Fallschirmjäger, which is a fairly well-known unit in Normandy. It was what defended Carentan against the 101st. If you remember the Battle of Brothers series, the attack into Carentan was against the 6th Fallschirmjäger. They start with 1 battalion in Carentan. Historically, that's where they were, actually Carentan and south of Carentan. And the other two battalions were either just on the map or just off the map, is where that regiment started. And its whole mission was anti-airborne. Well, what we learned based on the way the airborne was dropping in this area around the let me get the cursor right, around the Maridere River, is there's a bridge here and a bridge here that in a lot of cases, the Americans just don't have the combat power to do much with early in the game. And the
Okay.
6th Fallschirmjäger would run right up these roads, cross these bridges, and damn near be in St. Mary before the Americans could blink. So one of the things I did, because that is not what they did historically, they moved to the east and came up to join and form an entire regiment to fight as a consolidated whole. One of the design decisions there for the objectives in those scenarios was this town, Saint Marie de Mont, is part of their objective, not Saint Mary-Glise. So you can go take Saint Mary-Glise. You'll deny that from the Allies, and that hurts their victory conditions. But you don't get your victory conditions because you're not focused on where you were supposed to be going.
Yeah.
It allowed it doesn't force players to not play the way they want to, but it does give them indications of where they should be focused if they want to win the scenario.
Yeah, that's
Now,
interesting. Yeah.
in the campaigns, honestly, it's a much more free flowing, players. And I've seen, I had several guys that did the campaign play tests, where they actually put a bridge crossing in using some of the bridge crossing assets, right in this area, and assaulted south much more than, yes, Bill, you were the one that taught me that I needed to change that objective. You are correct. But they expanded well down into here where the Allies historically went north of the Douve River. Again, the game plays, the Germans had to adjust their lines to defend against the way the Allies were advancing. So in the larger games, the objectives usually are a lot less specific. In the smaller games where there's only a few turns or not a lot of time, the objectives are usually tried to tie back to historical objectives or the historical things that those particular commanders deemed important.
Okay. Yeah, this is such good stuff. So where do you well, okay, let me make sure I understood. This one was kind of started by the prior team, is that right? It had kind of okay. Well, let's step that aside for a minute, but because I think you can still answer this question even because now you're getting ready to start something else. How do you even start with a monster like this? How do you start with a monster like this? So you kind of know, I know this one was started, but I think you probably can answer this question. How do you even begin? It's like what? I mean, it's humongous. There's 2,900 counters in the game. Some of those are system counters, but still.
True. Honestly, from the counter perspective, it was going to be what it was going to be. I mean, there were certain units that were on this battlefield, and so those need to be represented, and we had to figure out how to make sure we accounted for all of them. Honestly, the number one issue that I looked at, and this could have been the military mindset in me, was if we are going to link 3 games together, we better have a plan of how to do that before we start the second game.
Okay.
I would have preferred to have had that plan before the first game was done, so I didn't have to do it. But that's not when I joined. So that really was my first focus in trying to set the conditions for Utah, was how do we try and arrange all 3 games so that they can be put together the way they're supposed to be. Should you ever go to a convention and have the space and the opportunity to do that. But getting that number one focus. Once I had that, like I said, the counters, doing a little research, figuring out, and in this case, the third designer, Vincent Lefebvre, who lives in Normandy, and was also involved in Sword Juno Gold. He created the German Order of Battle for both Sword Juno Gold and Utah, And as of an email yesterday, I think he's probably about 70% done with Omaha's German order of battle. So we are already building for Omaha as well, but he has a wealth of knowledge and resources that he was able to put together and build the German order of battle. And then I worked on actually Joe Chacon and I both worked on the order of battle for the Americans. Actually, and this is kind of interesting. Joe was building Race for Bastogne at the same time that we started Utah. One of the things that we worked together, and I actually went to his house one day for a weekend, and we literally just went through the American order of battle, not just for one game, but because in both Normandy, honestly, in Market Garden and in Bastogne, you have the 101st. So if we've done it right, and he's also redoing the Devil's Cauldron and hopefully Where Eagles Dare after that, that's to be determined. The 101st counters should be equivalent all the way through. Or as he and I determined as we went through this, the Americans learned and changed over time. So the bazookas you have in Normandy are not have in Bastogne 6 months later. So their numbers are a little bit different, but they're very similar in the way, because essentially the units themselves were the same. And so we wanted that continuity across all the games that were using the same types of units. And so that is one of the design features that we did with the counters or with the units specifically.
So do you start? So, as you mentioned, Omaha starting. So you start with the order of battle. Is that kind of how you start? And you're thinking
For the counters, absolutely. And the easy answer was what divisions were involved. Because there's a lot of resources on that, even down to the regiment, battalion, and the Americans are a lot easier because they're fairly simple in nature. Typically, it's a three power of three structure. You have 3 regiments per division. You have 3 battalions per regiment. You have 3 companies per. Now, having said that, you also have a headquarters that gets involved. So it's not quite as easy as just multiply by 3 all the way down. But the other problem was there's also an awful lot of additional assets, core assets that aren't part of a division, that go down sometimes even to the company level that were independent companies. And finding out who they are, one, verifying that they were on the battlefield, then figuring out what their equipment was. Those were a lot more serious research needed to get down to that level. But once you have all of that, the counters and the numbers kind of fall out from that. And so that was actually once we had the overall scope, figuring out the rest of it was an awful lot easier than I originally thought.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you kind of have the advantage of whether you like it or not. I mean, that you have the time limit set for you, which is kind of nice. I mean, you're starting out, you don't have to decide like, do I want to end it on 13th of June or the 20th of June or whatever. So that's kind of nice that there's some limitations that have been put on you, which actually is good for an artist and a designer.
It definitely helped.
Yeah, that's cool. So real quick, let's touch on this real quick. And you and I talked about this. Let's just give a little credit where credit is due. Who's doing the Vassal module? That's a huge thing.
Brent Easton is actually working the Vassal module right now. And I think at least 3 of the playtesters that are online with us tonight are also playtesting the Vassal module and helping him ensure that it is as good a module as he's done in the past. Actually, if I understand some of the things I'm hearing, it's probably going to be better because he's adding additional features. And if you don't know Brent, not only did he start building Vassal modules and built amazing Vassal modules, he's also joined the Vassal team building the engine itself. So he knows a whole bunch of different aspects that most people wouldn't know, and he brings all of that to the table.
This is good. That's cool. Thank you, Kent. Yeah. So Commando, it sounds like you don't have any experience with the module for Vassal module for GTS. I mean, even the old one, the older games, it's pretty incredible. Again, I told you that the combat is pretty easy, but there's a lot of pluses and minuses and ups and downs. Like I said, after 6 hours, I couldn't even do simple math, but it really is super helpful. Lots of line of sight, command range. There's just it's a great module, super well designed, lots of little things. In fact, so we played this little con game, and so we played online together to kind of get it going with Crete, and then we got offline. And so, but I even encouraged people who hadn't played, like, put the map on and play some on in person or even solo, just so you can kind of learn to do the math yourself, because the thing spoils you a little bit. And yes, I think that is the case. You will be able to link all the games in a monster game, I believe.
Yes, and Brent is actually designing it to do that. Even now, it's being designed that way. Obviously, without the third module or the third game in existence yet, he's designing it to be able to do all of that.
Look at these guys working while they're watching. I would appreciate this, guys. Get cracking. Let's go here, people. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So I think now maybe I should. Anyway, so this year we played at a small con, Crete, the whole thing. Well, we didn't play the whole thing. That's what we started playing. And then we did play last year at the same con with a similar group of people, the 1 day scenario for Gold Juno Sword. And when we did that, we did the same thing. We did all the landings on Vassal first so that we could get that kind of done. And if there was any weird anomalies, so like, oh my gosh, it was a disaster, whatever. So that way we get that done, and then everyone could be playing when we got in person. But at that module we used that was shared with us was, I think, that included the playtest stuff. I think it was a combined module or something, I think, if I'm thinking correctly. We didn't look at that one because we just used the Gold Juno Sword, I think. Anyway, Chris, thank you very much. Yeah, Chris, so your Commonwealth, your Canadian buddies are in this one over here. I can never point when I'm doing this. Chris is from Canada there. Okay. All right. This is fantastic. So let me just ask real quick. We're at an hour. Do you need to take a break or anything? Are you good or?
I'm good.
Okay. This came up while you were talking. So playtesting, I've done a little bit of, and I got to ask, how does chit pull impact playtesting? Like how many, because you might get one where it pulls great for the Allies or it pulls great for the Germans, and that can maybe skew the result. I mean, how many? All right, that's it. How does chit pull impact playtesting? Because it seems like it's pretty impactful.
I don't know that it made that big a difference, especially in the larger scenarios, because obviously, each turn, and I'm sure the playtesters that are on here will probably tell me that I'm incorrect, and they were spurned on several occasions because they didn't get the chits that they wanted in the sequence they wanted them in. But in the larger games, that kind of evens itself out. In the smaller games, there are a few rules. If we determine through playtesting that a certain sequence or a certain chit pulled at the wrong time would alter the overall outcome to the point where the game was unbalanced, then we would add some in. Most of that is with what is the first chit pulled, or when certain chits can be pulled. So, for instance, with the airborne landings, one of the aspects of the airborne landings is rally points. And every battalion that jumps in will place a rally point on the map, and that's where they rebuild their combat power. If the Germans take that, all the combat power that they have not rebuilt is lost. So those are very critical to Americans early on, and protecting those is very important. But the Germans aren't allowed to do anything. Their chits aren't even in the cup until the Americans have had a chance to reconstitute at least once. Now, you may fail in your rolls and not reconstitute well, and you may still be in jeopardy. But that was part of okay, here's a sequence that would really alter the enjoyability of the game. So we've got to make it so that, and arguably historically, the Americans who are jumping in are hyped up on caffeine and everything else and adrenaline, and they're moving at 100 miles an hour, and the Germans, who it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and unless they were fighting the fire in St. Mary-Glise that night, are for the most part not very active. So it's also historical that they don't get to have their chits early in that sequence. So there were a few modifications to the chit pull system, but as you move through the turns, those become non-existent. It's literally the chit pull randomization that allows the game to really force you to be not as aggressive as you would probably like to be. And I've learned, especially in the Market Garden series, the more aggressive you are, the better the outcome. Same thing here. The more aggressive you are, the better the outcome, but you also open yourself up to unfortunate circumstances. So you have to be aggressive with a little bit of caution.
So you never ran some experiments where you purposely pulled chits out to kind of test order, like, oh my gosh, what if the Americans get, to see if something was happening? Did you ever do that, as far as you know?
Definitely not in the longer scenarios. In some of the very short scenarios, yes,
Okay.
but you only have 2 or 3 chits anyway because they're such a small scenario.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hey, Commando, keep asking questions. It's great. Please ask away. We
Appreciate it.
appreciate the questions. Last thing on this, kind of broad, and then we're going to get into scenario design. Is there anything you learned specific, like something surprised you during playtesting?
I want to say there were numerous surprises. I'm not certain
sure
that I can come up with an example. Um, since I do have several of the playtesters on here, guys, do you have any assistance for me?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. This is actually great. It's so cool to have so many playtesters, not all of them, but yeah, playtesters. Did something come up that surprised you, or that when you asked Tom or the other team, that they're like, holy crap, I don't know. So yeah, if you remember something like that. So we're going to move on to scenario design, answer that, and we'll come back to the comments here. All right. So now you have your date, you have your divisions. So you got, those are some of your limitations. And because of the date, you kind of limit your map size. Now you're like, okay, well, we're not going to go all the way to here and blah, 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 because it's the date. So now, how do you choose the battles to include?
So the nice thing about this particular, about an invasion game, is you basically start from a known point, which is pre-invasion. And so a lot of the scenarios will start either with the airborne drops or the seaborne landing, which is essentially a known point. The question is, how long will the scenario be, or what does it focus on? Probably the area that I had a harder time with was the independent scenarios that are small battles. For instance, the Battle for Saint Mary-Glise, and it's actually called Voie de la Liberté, Kilometre Zero, which I do give an explanation for the naming of that scenario. It is in French, but it refers to the Victory Road, or the Liberation Road, excuse me, which, believe it or not, there are 3 kilometer zero markers in France, because there is the town of Saint Mary-Glise, which is the first town liberated on D-Day. There is a village that was the first village liberated, and then there is Utah Beach, which is the first beach that was actually invaded. So, and one is 0, one is 00, and one is 000. Makes it a little hard if you're going to try and follow the path, because you have 3 start points. But they actually have markers that run, I believe, all the way to Belgium.
Oh,
so
really?
it's essentially, you can follow the path of the American Army as it moved across Northern Europe with these liberty markers. So the Battle of Saint Mary-Glise being the first city or town liberated, it was a good opportunity to highlight that little historical aspect that still exists today, and the marker is in front of the I'm going to butcher my French, Hotel de Ville, which is essentially town capital, or the mayor's office. That marker sits in front of that building and had, I believe, in the 1950s. But the battle for St. Mary-Église essentially is, you start with the Americans in St. Mary-Église because they took it early on the morning of June 6th, depending on who you read and what source you look at and when you think the Germans actually fully left the town, which there weren't that many there to begin with. Around 6 a.m., St. Mary-Église was liberated. It was that quick.
Oh wow.
I mean, they
Dang.
dropped between 1 and 3 in the morning, and by 6 a.m., that town was under their control.
Wow.
So that particular battle starts a little bit later, and Todd, I think you've got the file up. I don't have it in front of me right now. If you look at that particular scenario, you can see the time frame on it to see when the start turn is.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me look at that. Is that a intro? What's the?
Should be introductory scenario 3 or 4, I think.
Okay. So yeah.
It's the only one in French.
Yeah. I saw that one. I was like, oh boy, the race to defend St. Mary-Église, the
Correct.
English. So it is 0700 on 6th
Yep.
to the I'm sorry, on the 7th tonight. So
yeah. So the June 6th, other than throwing out the one, and it was really a transportation maintenance unit for the Germans that was in St. Mary-Église, which and this was one of the design features for that particular unit. It is essentially a die-in-place unit. It really doesn't have much combat power other than the fact that it's going to annoy the Americans from getting into St. Mary-Église early on. And if you try to throw small airborne, not fully reconstituted units against it, you might find yourself getting a bad die roll and really having a problem. If you throw full strength units against it, it can't stand. It'll go away fairly quickly. But it also has 0 movement. It must die in place.
Gotcha.
That was not an original feature because it did have vehicles, but that particular unit didn't go anywhere. It literally fought there and died there. So we made that a part of the game, very small aspect of the game. But on the 6th, there wasn't much going on. The Allies, or the Americans, took St. Mary-Église, kind of owned it. The Germans were constituting their power mainly from the north with 3 battalions composed of 2 different regiments to assault into St. Mary-Église and take it back. Because if you look at the map and you can see the entire Cotentin Peninsula, at least the base, St. Mary-Église is only one of 2 or maybe 3 north-south corridors. And it's the primary one that was used, and to this day is still the primary one, because it's the one that links to the rest of the beaches. So if you go further to the west of the Cotentin, you really get north-south corridors that go down into Brittany rather than going over towards Normandy, or the rest of Normandy, I should say. So that was a primary village or town, and that was why it was an objective for the 82nd on D-Day. So the Germans wanted it back, and that was a goal of theirs to take that back. So they launch with 3 battalions against what is maybe, well, officially there were only 2 battalions of the 505th in St. Mary-Église defending it, the 2nd and the 3rd Battalion. 2nd Battalion was to the south and east, and 3rd Battalion was to the south and east. 2nd Battalion was to the north and west, essentially forming a circle around, or a ring around, St. Mary-Église.
Okay.
And I know the playtesters are going to chime in on this. To the east of St. Mary-Église at this time, you have the 795th German Ost Battalion. Actually, Georgian Ost Battalion, excuse me. They were Georgian soldiers that had fought on as Russians, been captured, and turned into German soldiers. There's also a battalion of Russians in Utah. I know there's a battalion of Russians in Sword Juno Gold. There may be a battalion of Ukrainians. So the Ost battalions were essentially additional labor. But this particular battalion really didn't want to give up. And it fought for almost 2 days before the entire 4th Infantry Division and a good portion of the 82nd Airborne convinced them otherwise, which is actually a really interesting story because I think they would have fought even longer. But a captured American paratrooper who spoke Russian convinced them that it was in their best interest to surrender. Finally.
Wow.
Otherwise, they would have prevented the invasion from advancing as quickly as it did, and they still prevent the invasion from advancing quickly. They hold up the 4th Infantry Division for about a day on June 6th, and it wasn't until the afternoon of June 7th that they give up. So that particular scenario, you've got to the north a German regimental conf group with additions. To include some Stug 3s assaulting down into St. Mary-Glise. You've got 2 battalions or portions of 2 battalions, because they still aren't at full strength yet, of American paratroopers in St. Mary-Glise. Then below that, you've got a German Ost battalion that's in defensive positions just trying not to get killed. And then below that, south of that, you've got the 4th Infantry Division, or about half of the 4th Infantry Division, as well as armor support that was designed to support the 82nd, trying to get to St. Mary-Glise. And so the race is really, do the Germans take St. Mary-Glise before the Americans can get rid of the German Ost Battalion and get up and support and provide the support needed? I will tell you, the American Airborne is a very tough foe. So the Germans have a challenge on their hands, even if the Airborne doesn't get supported. But that's the historical fight.
Gotcha.
And some interesting, you mentioned earlier, Mike, talking about some of the stories. In that particular battle, there should have been several medals of honor received in that particular fight on 6 and 7 June. So one aspect that is in the game, and it's a little kind of initial piece to the game. There is, and you've played the game, so you know what a rear guard is. Rear guard's probably not the best term for what they do. They're detachments more than anything.
Yep.
But it's a platoon size element. So an individual by the name of Lieutenant Turner B. Turnbull, his platoon was in the village of Nouvelle-au-Plain, which, let me see if I can bring up the map.
Oh, here, I can bring it up.
So we can actually talk about, okay, let me go. Where's my sharing thing? Stop sharing, and then we will share this if I can get to it.
So yeah, we've had a couple of, while you're kind of doing that. Let's I love being aggressive with this game system, says Mike.
Yes, he does. He is very good at it.
Little Bill poking at Kent a little bit. That's cool. What Mike said, I remember one scenario, the tough hombre see the elephant. My unique solution is the allies. I'd love to hear it. So yeah, that's yeah, interesting. Okay, so let's see. Let me add this to the stage. Yep. There we go.
So this is one of the back printed maps that it goes all the way from Utah Beach, if I were to zoom out, and then to the west, so that you don't have to have the 2 north-south maps, because the majority of the fighting was more east-west than it was north-south. So this just allows you to reduce the size of the map space needed for some of the scenarios. But the St. Mary-Glise area, drop zone O, which is in this area, that's where the 505th landed. The 2 battalions, 2nd and 3rd, went down. Well, 3rd Battalion's mission was to take St. Mary-Glise. 2nd Battalion's mission was to take Nouvelle-au-Plain. 1st Battalion was supposed to come down here to Lafayette, just on the edge of what you can see. The leadership, both General Gavin, the Deputy Commanding General for the 82nd Airborne, and Colonel Ekman, the 505th Regimental Commander, had not heard from 3rd Battalion on the morning of June 6th. And St. Mary Glease, being their primary objective, ordered the 2nd Battalion Commander, Colonel Ben Vandervoort, and if you've ever seen the movie The Longest Day, Ben Vandervoort was portrayed by John Wayne in that movie. Just as an after the war historical fact. But his battalion was ordered to go to St. Mary Glease because that's your primary objective. We don't think we've taken it. We need everyone there to go do that. He made what is arguably one of the best command decisions historically, or at least in World War II. He followed orders. He took his battalion to St. Mary Glease, but he issued orders to Lieutenant Turnbull to go take Nouvelle-au-Plain, his original objective. And that one platoon held the German Kampfgruppe up for 6 June and kept them at bay for an entire day while the airborne kind of invested their defense in St. Mary Glease. So on June 7th, the fight kicks off taking Nouvelle-au-Plain, and there that starts there, which is essentially Turnbull's platoon that gets assaulted, and I believe out of that entire platoon, there were only 4 soldiers that were not wounded, captured, or killed. So out of about a 10% healthy survival rate. I believe the overall rate was somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% that were ultimately either captured and reconstituted back to the American Army when they moved back north, and recaptured their own or liberated their own people. But that platoon literally fought its heart out. That was one potential Medal of Honor that could have been received that day, but it was not. So then the fight continues down this way. The next piece is on the night of 6 June, going into the morning of 7 June, there is another lieutenant out of that same battalion, Waverly Ray, who went on a one-man recon to figure out what were the Germans that are going to attack us in the morning. And I believe at the time he was fulfilling the intelligence officer role, which was why he was the one going out on the recon. And and I don't know the exact location, it's somewhere up just north of St. Mary Glease, in the hedgerow country, because he was crawling along a hedgerow and he heard German voices on the other side of the hedgerow. So I say hedgerow because this was not the standard bocage, because when he stood up, he was tall enough to see over the hedgerow. In this particular one instance, there is a lot of what the French call bocage in that area, and is the standard, large scale hedgerows that are infested and have been there for centuries. And so the dirt has built up around the bases, very formidable obstructions to movement. But he stands up, yells out Hand hoch, which is put your hands up. And 7 of the 8 people sitting around a radio complied. The 8th person went for his sidearm. Waverly Ray killed all 8 of them. It was a battalion command post. Basically eliminated one of the 3 battalions single-handedly by taking its command structure out before the attack the next morning. Not that they didn't participate, but they did not have the leadership they needed to participate effectively. He was recommended for the Medal of Action, and to Colonel Vandervoort's dying day, and I've seen the letters, he was pushing the government to issue a Medal of Honor to Waverly Ray. It was never given because there were no witnesses to the event. And that is one of the requirements for the Medal of Honor. And actually, in that particular fight, a machine gun nest opened up on him and clipped his ear to the point where he was bleeding down his neck. No, well, I guess you could call it permanent damage. He had a nick in his ear for the rest of his life, but head wounds bleed fairly profusely. So when he ran into Colonel Vandervoort the next morning, and you see all the dried blood on his neck, Vandervoort said to him, "Waverly, Germans seem to be getting kind of close to you." And because he was a good Southern drawl, very Southern as I understand, he looked back at his battalion commander and said, "Not as close as I'm getting to them, sir."
Nice. Yeah, so this kind of real quick here. Let me see here. But you can keep that sharing. I'll come back to that maybe. So I just pulled out so this is the ASL St. Marigolese map here, and this is St. Marigolese here. There are two other maps that go south and north or whatever direction they are from here. So that you can see on that map is kind of because these are like 50, 60 meter Texas. And
actually, if you look at the buildings in that map and compare it to
yeah, that's what I was doing.
It's very similar because
Yep.
we actually use the 1944 Corps of Engineer maps, and that's what Nico uses as the base to build the GTS maps off of.
Great covers there. Okay, so this leads me into a question about, oh shoot, there are also Vanderhoot and Vanderhoort and what's the other name you said? Wheatley? No, that's anyway.
Waverly Ray.
Yeah, that counter is not actually in here. That's interesting, but they do have some named leaders in there.
He was, yeah. I don't think he was a platoon leader. I think, like I said, I think he was the intelligence officer, so he was a staff officer. But honestly, gotcha. every paratrooper was a paratrooper first, and did their function. He was an infantry officer at the time. We didn't have MI, or military intelligence. So infantry officers fulfilled those roles. And unfortunately, both of those lieutenants, one of them, and I forget which, was killed in Normandy, and the other was killed in Market Garden.
Yeah. So viewers, real quick. I mean, like I said, when I started this, I said I have about 4 hours worth of questions but I'm keeping them to 2 here because so I can be keep me honest here. But and he's not crazy like I am. So but
that's debatable.
Well, that's okay. I don't really know you that well, so maybe the playtesters can comment on your mental state. But my point is, if you're all enjoying this talk and you might like to see us back, and it'll be Tom if Tom wants to come back, or maybe some of the other playtesters. Actually, Mike, I thought about getting you on here, but I thought, well, let me just stick with us for now. But I think so. Viewers, let me know. Would you be interested in kind of hearing maybe really more specifics about a particular scenario and kind of getting these details and kind of breaking it down after it's released? Everyone's got it. We can kind of be a little bit more open with the information. Not that it's really secret, but we're not sharing a lot of stuff. And if you have it in front of you, it's easier to look at and stuff. If you'd be interested in that, let us know. And, maybe we can come back after it releases, like in a month or two, and just talk, because we could really talk about these, especially, these stories off the top of your head. I'd probably like to have my friend McMurray at the least, some of my friends here, because that guy, he's like you. It sounds like an encyclopedia of knowledge about stuff. So, all right. Scenario design, you've kind of gone. So what makes, so forget the campaigns, because that's kind of their thing, but what kind of battle makes for a good GTS game? So like you have like attacking Brecourt Manor, which is pretty small, and anyway, so what makes a good GTS battle?
It depends on what the goal is. So the learning scenarios, and honestly, I wasn't certain that Brecourt was not my primary thought when I was building a learning scenario. But as I was kind of pushed into that because Band of Brothers and several people who have influence over the entire thing said you have to do a scenario on that. So I started looking into it. But what I realized is that particular scenario, the way it's built, even though it has very few units, it has direct fire, it has assault, literally built into the very first turn. It has indirect fire, obviously
Mm,
movement. It has all of the base rules
interesting.
without necessarily needing to use any of the more advanced rules, so that you can use it to learn the system itself on a very small scale and apply all of the base rule components. So that particular scenario was more focused around that function. Um, some of the others, I would argue, and Joe Chacon and I have talked about this several times. Really, the best GTS scenarios on a smaller scale are those that give you the option to both defend and attack,
Yeah.
whether that be from one unit or multiple units, but each side has that ability. And so, the St. Mary scenario, initially the Americans are defending in the middle, the Germans are attacking from the north, and the Germans are defending in the south, and the Americans are attacking from the south.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
both sides get to do both offense and defense,
Okay.
which adds, that's really where the game shines on a small scale. On a large scale, although you want that, honestly, on a large scale, you're going to get that no matter what.
Yeah.
So there now, I would argue the further you go into a Normandy scenario, if the Germans are continuing to attack, you better be pretty cautious about how you do that. There are times when you can get away with it, and Mike can attest to how you do that because I've seen him do it. But most of the time, you're more on the defense as you get further into a campaign game, and that's just the way that particular operation was fought. The Allies
Yeah.
were the attacker, and the Germans were the defender.
So on the
Um,
large, so again, forget the campaigns, like say the advanced scenarios or higher intermediates. I mean, I assume something similar, but is there something different you're looking for those? Like what makes a particular battle good or bad?
so the advanced scenarios, and honestly, I don't remember exactly how I kind of determine the learning scenario. Obviously, that's an easy one, very
Yeah.
small scale. The introductory scenarios are designed to be, I believe, somewhere between 3 to 7 turns
Okay.
in total. Some of those being very small. The invasion scenarios are an 8.5 by 11 map,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's one thing that I haven't mentioned. There's actually 2 invasion beaches for Utah, and that's because, again, doing some of the research, there was the planned invasion beach,
Yep.
and then there's where they actually landed.
Why did
Depending
they
on
land
which
in the
historian you read, there's a whole bunch of reasons as to why they didn't actually land where they planned to land. A
okay.
lot of it having to do with smoke, a lot of it having to do with navigational aids, some pointing at the Navy if they don't like the Navy.
Yeah.
Any number of reasons as to why they landed about 2 kilometers away from where they planned to land. But where they did land was actually not nearly as well defended as where they planned to land. They
Okay.
didn't know that. And so we actually have beach overlays for both of those. So you can play either the actual landing or you can play the planned landing. And each of those is their own scenario, just on an 8.5 by 11 overlay as well.
Okay.
So those are some of the smaller introductory scenarios. You get a little bit larger, like I said, somewhere between 4 and 8. The intermediate scenarios are 2 to 3 days in general.
Okay.
So they're longer, bordering on operation versus battle, but really still at that true tactical level. The
Okay.
advanced scenarios, those are really cut down versions of the campaign. So you either have one that is literally trying to cross the peninsula, but it's that narrow focus across the peninsula. You don't worry about the 4th Infantry Division going north. You really don't worry about the 101st going south. You're focused on the 82nd. You initially see both the 4th and the 101st, and then they move off to the flanks. But then you get the 90th Infantry Division and the 9th Infantry Division that support. And it's almost the full campaign, but it's focused on a very narrow area, so the map can be a lot smaller. A lot
Okay.
is a relative term. The map can be smaller.
Yeah.
So that's how the advanced scenarios were built.
Okay.
And then the campaign games, again, following from the Sword Juno Gold concept, there's really kind of two versions. There's the 1 day version, and then there's the full, what is it, 9 days, whatever the 5th through the 13th is,
Yeah.
version. But because you also have the hypothetical where the airborne is landing somewhere other than they did historically, which, as I already explained, was well within the realm of possible, given that they almost did it. You have two 1 day campaign games, one which is the historical version, and one is with the altered airborne landing. And then you have 3 additional campaigns, which are full campaign games. One of which is the full historical campaign. Another is the full hypothetical campaign. And then one that I did not plan on building, but it seemed players really wanted, is the "we'll take it from here" scenario, which starts, I believe, at 11 o'clock on June 6th. So you don't have to go through the invasion sequence. You don't have to go through the airborne sequence. You start really at the point where everyone's on the map and you're fighting from there, and it's the full campaign at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So that's, I think that gets asked a lot. There's a couple people that are pretty vocal about those, and I kind of like that. I don't think there's one for Gold's
There is not.
The Commonwealth. Maybe someone could design one. I was talking to someone about that, and it'd be tough to do, but it is nice.
Honestly, that was a harder scenario to design than any of the other campaigns, because again, you have to figure out where everyone was 6 hours into the invasion.
I know. I think it would be hard. I think it'd be really tough to do that because, yeah. Okay. That's cool. Thank you so much for that. I am going to actually take a break here and visit the restroom. Philly's free. Thank you, everybody. Continue asking questions. I'm going to put up my little sign here so that, let's see, where did that sign go? Oh, there it is. All right. We'll be right back. I don't know, just a couple minutes. Tom, we'll be right back. You can just stay on where you are.
Okay. Yep.
Put that up. And there we go. I am going not never mind. Okay.
So awesome. I just noticed that, you mentioned that your grandfather was in the 12th Armored, and did I see he was in the 56th Armored Infantry Regiment?
Battalion. Yeah.
Okay.
They didn't have regiments in
okay. Yeah,
some of the armored divisions. Yeah.
That is a little bit different, because in Normandy you had the 2nd Armored Division, which was still under the old heavy armor version. So they actually still had the armored infantry regiments. And in Utah, there are 2 scenarios. One scenario. I'd have to go back and look. Bill and Kent, help me out here, because you guys play tested those scenarios to death. Is Combat Command Alpha in both of the Carentan scenarios? I know it's in the Unite Omaha and Utah. I don't remember if it's in Lions of Carentan or if they show up the next day. But you do get to see Sherman tanks, which you don't get a lot of those in Utah. But the Second Armored Division did come, not necessarily to the rescue of the 101st. I think they owned Carentan anyway, but they did scare off the rest of the 17th SS on the 13th of June. And that's portrayed in Band of Brothers as well in the defense of Carentan. I think they call it the Battle of Bloody Gulch.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one. Just real quick. So my grandfather was in the supply company of 56th Armored Infantry Battalion, and the maps up there at that very top row are his maps he used.
Oh wow!
And there's a pencil line on them. You can kind of see the pencil line,
Huh.
but they're laid down sideways. It's from the port of Marseille up to Nancy, and it's the route they took, the roundabout route. It wasn't called Red Ball Express at that point, I don't think, but he would drive down and they would drive up to get the supplies. So it was his marking on the map saying, "Turn here, go here." Pretty awesome.
Wow, that's amazing.
No, I feel so fortunate to have it. And then the big one over here is the Marseille map. So I need to get a frame for it and cant it sideways too. So, and then some of his medals. So the 12th was one of the units that was created for the war and disbanded almost as soon as the war was over. So it doesn't exist, but they still meet every year for a reunion. The guys that are a few guys left. So have met it's one of the most consistent reunion divisions there out there. So it's kind of cool. So,
oh, that's outstanding.
I was fortunate to be able to meet them when they were here in St. Louis. I really need to try to go to one more because we're losing them. So, okay. I'm sorry.
And
I don't think.
Actually, I just realized if you look at the counters that you've got on the map or on the image right now, that is Combat Command Alpha at the very bottom.
Oh, right there. Yep, there are the tanks.
Yep.
I don't think I asked this. What unit was your dad in? I mean, what did he serve?
He was in the 505th, 3rd Battalion, 505th. At least when they jumped in, he jumped in as the Battalion XO, and within 2 weeks he was the battalion commander of 1st Battalion.
Really?
The airborne took amazing losses.
Yeah,
especially in their leadership, and we actually added some rules in the game to help replicate just how bad their losses are.
Oh, okay. I mean, you watch Band of Brothers. If you're not familiar with it, I mean, Band of Brothers shows that. I mean, it's kind of how Winters gets, where he is in some, I mean, besides his performance, obviously, but there's people lost.
Well, his commander didn't make it to Normandy, at least not alive.
Yeah, I know.
His plane was shot down. So
pretty wild. All right. So we actually got like 15 minutes left. I'm like, oh boy, I got a lot more to go here. Let me kind of look through my questions here real quick. Yeah, that's an interesting. Okay, let's. We could talk about scenarios. So yeah, I think whether people want to see it or not, I want to know. So if you're willing, I think I'd love to have you back to talk about some of these scenario questions I have. But let's talk about a couple other things. Let's talk about unit design. One thing I always wonder, I'm like, how the heck do you label a 2, a 6, a 14? And I'm just throwing numbers out there, but how do you go about doing that? And I don't know, maybe do you have a thing and we can zoom in and you can kind of talk through? I was reading just real quick. I was reading the rules for this one because I want to play one of these scenarios this week. And I was just kind of reading through some of like Adam's notes and stuff, which is really nice to have. And like he explained like why some of the tank units in that particular one were like, why were they so reduced when you flipped them over? And he described, like, well, they started out with the 17 pounders. Is that right? Is that the right number? The Fireflies.
Right, the Fireflies.
Yeah, there's like 5 Fireflies in the company or whatever the number is. Sorry, I'm messing that up. Well, those are going to be lost, and those are pretty powerful. But then you're left with Cromwells or whatever the tank is. I thought, well, that's kind of a cool. I appreciate that description. I mean, people could probably argue the exact numbers all day long. I don't care about that. I don't know enough about that, but I am curious how you get to that. So yeah, you have some counters pulled up. Let me share that.
So let me go to that screen so I can
Let's get rid of our mugs and look. So I guess what I'm really looking for is, I don't know, how do you come up with the quality ratings? I think firepower is probably kind of understood, but anyway, so
So
explain away.
the troop quality,
Yeah, that's the big one that I think is seems kind of subjective. More, I mean,
it is.
I guess it all is,
I
but
won't lie to you. I will tell you the way that we looked at it very specifically is how well in these first 9 days of Normandy did this particular unit operate? And that then, because you only have so many different options, and you're not going to go up to a 9, although there are a few units that have 8s.
ooh,
They are very, very few and far between. Your really, really good units have 7s. Your very competent units have 6s. Your average units would have 5. Your poor units would have 4, and then really the 3s and below are exceptions. Not to call out any individual unit, but it also somewhat applies. So you'll notice if you look, and we'll use. I can't believe I pulled up Easy Company 506. That was just way too easy. But this area right here is 2nd Battalion 506. So Easy Company, because of its notoriety more than anything, I don't necessarily believe it was that much better than any other airborne company in the 506th. But the 506th really did, it distinguished itself in Normandy.
right.
And because of Easy Company's notoriety, we did give them a little bit of a boost. So they are one of the few units that gets an 8 as a TQ. The other units in that battalion both have 7s, the other two companies. And then the mortar or headquarters company, but comprised of the mortars, is 1 less than the standard. So that's where in a poor unit, you will see some mortar units or some support units that are 1 lower than the average within the unit. Let me see if I can go to a.
So real quick, for those maybe who don't know, and so the numbers are I'm looking at. Oh, whoops. So you got.
Sorry,
No,
I
that's
just
okay.
moved it on you, didn't I?
Yeah, that's cool. So we'll look at the Easy Company. So the pink 4s are firepower. The red 5 down low below it is its assault rating. So when they're going into close assault, that's what that is. The top right 8 is their quality rating. And this is what you roll against.
Yep.
Troop quality, sorry. Troop quality using a D10. So remember, everything's being rolled against a D10. But so an 8 is, and you want to roll that number or lower. So an 8 is incredible. An 8 is crazy. That's why most of them aren't that, because that you never. So, and then the 4 is their movement. And then the -1 down here is their defense value. So some of this I can kind, yeah. So yeah, interesting. And then we won't talk about all the other numbers and stuff. But that's what those numbers are, just in case. But really, this, to me, I always curious about this troop quality rating, and then kind of understanding like, yeah, okay, they're going to be pretty good at the close assault. That's why the 5 compared to this mortar company, they're not going to be great on the assault. They're not built for that. That's not what they're for. I mean, they're going to try to survive, but they're not built for going in and taking people out. So there's some reasons, and the colors all mean stuff and stuff, but we're not going to get into that right now. So, all right, now you can zoom out. Sorry. Thanks.
Yeah. I mentioned, and I'll hit kind of the elite units. You already saw Easy Company, but the truly elite unit, and I've already talked about them, is 2nd Battalion 505th. So there I am, right up here.
And let me kind of step through something else real quick. So each division, like, so he said this earlier, Tom said this earlier. So usually what you do is one player commands a division. You don't have to do it that way. That's just kind of how you do it. And then you have all these formations, which are regiments, right? So these 4, you're gonna have 3 basic. Yeah.
It depends. The airborne units had 4 regiments because
4.
they added a glider. Actually, they had a glider and 2 airborne. And for Normandy, they added a third airborne or paratrooper regiment.
Yep. So you're really managing your whole division, but then these formations are what you're kind of putting those chits in or out of the cup if on your choice. And
Right.
I mean, so again, simplifying a lot here, but it's really cool. Okay, so go ahead.
So the true, I call them the pipe swingers, and I've already talked about them. This is the
There
same
are a lot of
company
eights
that,
there.
yeah. So this is the battalion that was commanded by Ben Vandervoort. Again, John Wayne played him in a movie. If it's good enough for John Wayne, then obviously they did well, and arguably their combat history is unbelievable in Normandy. I've mentioned a few of their platoon leaders or a few of their officers, but Delta Company was where Turner Turnbull came from, and so they are the best unit in the entire game. You've got an 8 TQ and a -2 defense rating.
That's crazy.
Now, the other piece, and some of this goes to both, I mentioned trying to figure out how to choose some of this based off their combat history. The other piece that a lot of people don't know for the Americans in Utah, the only combat unit or the only unit that was in these 9 days that had prior combat experience was the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. No other unit from the American side on Utah had combat experience that was involved in the invasion itself.
What was their experience?
Sicily
Oh,
and
okay.
Italy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, because the 82nd is what went into Sicily, right? Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
But they only went in with two regiments, the 505th and the 504th. The 504th
Okay.
and 505th also jumped into Italy. The 505th was pulled out. The 504th stayed. And so when they went to England to reconstitute for Normandy, the 504th did not get there in time, and that's why they did not participate in Normandy. With one small exception, which I had to make a change to the counters at a very late stage because I finally found a piece of history that told me this. Charlie 307th Engineer was actually the engineer company attached to the 504th in Italy. And because they still wanted additional engineer support, they managed to cobble together about half the company. That's why it only has one step. That is intentional. That they brought into Normandy later in the campaign. It did not come in on D-Day the way Alpha and Bravo did. But that is now there are some 504th soldiers that did participate. In fact, several of them jumped in as pathfinders, volunteered to go with the 82nd, even though their unit was not going with the 82nd.
Okay. Commando asked, how did you find all the leaders' pictures, or are they just artist renditions?
So we tried to find pictures of every leader. I will say we probably got to the 75% level. And let me back out of here for a second. So another thing I really like about this game, or the series in general, if you look at the American or British counters, you get NATO symbology because that's where NATO symbology came from, was from the Western Allies. If you look at the German counters, the symbols you have there are German symbology from World War II.
Yep.
It gets really interesting when you get into some of the lesser known titles in the GTS series. No Question of Surrender, where you have French and Italians. And granted, you follow the colors and the numbers, but I couldn't identify some of the symbols that are used. But it does, especially for a student of history, I really like the detail that goes there. Same thing with the
No,
leaders.
it's fantastic. Yeah.
So, the leaders, if we could at all, and the division commanders are easy. All the division commanders are photos of them.
Yep.
But the formation commanders or leaders, specifically the ones on the map, are all actual photos of Colonel Ekman, Colonel Millette, Colonel Lindquist, But when we get into, and this is a difference in Utah from other, oh, I went the wrong way. Let me go to the backside. So these are the backside counters of those same leaders. And the replacement leader is, as you can see, there's at least one image that's the same.
More generic, yeah.
Those are generic. This one that has a name, that's actually a photo of Lieutenant Colonel Maloney.
Gotcha.
So we tried to be as historically accurate as we could. And the Germans have something similar. I would say we were a little less successful with German leaders, just because their photos aren't as easily available.
How do you come up with the rating for the leaders as far as like? I guess then so one of the numbers, everyone, people who are watching it know, one of the numbers is how many independent units they can activate, and the other one is their range. I guess I'm more curious about their range. Like, how does that? Why does that even vary? Why isn't it always 6 or 5?
Yeah, so that was dealt with an awful lot of playtesting, not necessarily to get the right number, but using their historical capabilities. And what you can see on the front side, all of these are the same.
Oh, okay.
So in many cases, you'll see the front side being very similar to each other. The Germans, it gets a lot more. Now, some of that's also not true because there's at least one commander. Yeah. So Colonel Mosley was actually relieved of command for being insane.
Whoa, really?
Early in the war, early in the invasion. So he starts with a little bit less because he's a little bit crazy. Colonel Sink was actually a very good regimental commander. And so we give him a little bit more, seemed to be more capable than others. Colonel Ware ultimately got relieved, so he starts with a little bit less. So some of that plays into it. The range should be almost identical, at least with standard units. So airborne units should almost all have a range of 5 as their primary. But if you get into, I think, General Rose, no, I didn't go far enough. Hang on. General Rose has a range of 9. Because as an armor combat command commander, he's riding around on a tank and carrying a radio that's 5 times the size of anything that a paratrooper would be carrying. Has a lot more range to it.
That makes
so we actually looked at the radios that they would have had, what they could have carried, what they would have had with them, and also same thing with your standard infantry regimental commander, because they had jeeps and they had the ability to command cars to go with them. They had a larger command range than the airborne did. Now, I will tell you, we probably degraded the airborne just a little bit because of the way they fought in Normandy and the fact that they were so dispersed initially. That played into how much they could command and what their span of control could be.
Yeah.
So the radios they had were probably a little bit better. We degraded them a little bit.
I wonder what the airborne leaders up in Arnhem were. I wonder what those. Now I'm looking at my box going, I want to see what those were.
So unfortunately, they are on the GTS 1.0 version. They did have a command range, but they did not have an attachment rating. That was new to the 2.0 rules.
I guess I'm wondering about their hex range because they're notoriously bad radios. I'm curious what's going on there.
And off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Yeah, no, that's cool. All right, so we had a couple of questions. So Ty jumped on with us, Games from the Front. He was on the show here a couple of weeks ago. Mike and Kenton, there's a little discussion here, and I'd like us to cover that. If you've got a few minutes, it's going to take us over 2 hours, but I'm going to focus on them, and I have a couple I want to close out with. So Ty says, Tom, what was your mindset when deciding what to keep from SJG and what's that's Juno Gold, Commonwealth Beaches?
Keep as much as possible because eventually all these games are going to be linked together. But there were several things that didn't fit or we had to modify to make it work. And Mike will remember the night early in playtesting where he and I sat around a table literally all night trying to figure out how to use the airborne drop rules that existed in Sword Juno Gold, but make them work for the American Airborne, which was a completely different type of drop. And so we use the same table. The table is exactly the same as Sword Juno Gold, but there are a few additional modifiers because in Sword Juno Gold, everything landed on a clear hex. I challenge you to find a clear hex on the Utah map. They do exist, but they're hard to find. So obviously the terrain played into how bad your drop was. The actual way the ship, the C-47s came in, and the weather that they encountered coming across the peninsula also impacted their drop, and scattered them much more than the British were scattered, which then led to a much slower consolidation. And so we had to add some rules to really make it harder for the airborne to consolidate quickly.
Okay.
But we were tied to trying to make as much as possible work from the original game.
Okay. Yeah, I think Mike's kind of commenting on that here. So let's see, maybe, and not the endemic damage there were during the campaign. I don't know about that. So let's see what Kent said here. Tom wanted to model the difficulty in railing. Okay, yeah, this is kind of all the same, kind of the same lines here, which is good. Appreciate that. And what's he say here? Yes, we had several. Oh yeah, okay. So you just said that. That's pretty cool. Let's see here. Yeah, and there's another one here. What's this talk about? Now placing a contact. I'm not sure what.
That's a Vassal, is what he's
Oh,
talking
a
about.
Vassal thing. Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Oh yeah, hey, yeah, I agree. Show us some love, man. Give us those thumbs up. That's where we like a good set of thumbs. Okay, yeah, okay, blah blah blah. Okay, all right. So final kind of wrap up question. I sure appreciate your time. 2 hours on whatever night. It's our Thursday night. This is fantastic. On June 6th, everybody, remember the guys and that did the jumps and rode those Higgins boats in, and just I don't know, read a book, take a minute to be quiet for them. It's pretty crazy, all the planning, everything that went in. It's wild. And that's I think that's why a lot of us play these games, is kind of as a way to honor and remember and study and kind of bring it to life, so we can kind of not experience it, but kind of experience it in a different way than just reading a book or watching a movie or a documentary or something. So let's see here. Okay, what's the so I hate to ask this as someone, because I've had huge projects, nothing like this, but you get done and be like, what's next? Like, dude, but Tom, what's next? Come on, man, what's next? This is gonna be out in like a couple weeks. Let's go.
As I already mentioned, Omaha is the next one, and we already have. As we were designing Utah, we were doing some work for Omaha. So hopefully, and especially since there's not a plan to have the designer change this time, not that there was a plan last time, but it happened.
Sure. Yeah.
So we shouldn't have some of those delays. So in theory, we should be able to get Omaha out in less than 10 years. That is definitely the goal. But I've learned some of the things, and one of the first things is we've got to get the map done first, because you can't do any of the play testing. Honestly, the counters, I mentioned that Vincent's got a good 75% solution on the German order of battle. When we were designing Utah, we designed Omaha for the most part as well, minus a few of the TQ numbers. The allied counters are in theory designed. They haven't been built yet. So we're already there. Thinking about the rules, honestly, there's not going to be any airborne, so we don't have to worry about that.
That's huge.
The play testing will determine if the Rangers will follow the same sort of sequence of a naval invasion that your standard beaches were. I think they will work, but until we play test it, I won't know if we need to make some modifications. I think the biggest concern I have with Omaha is, how do I slow the Americans down?
Okay.
Because minus the initial crust, which arguably was painful and ugly, there wasn't much for the Germans to defend with. until about the 13th of June.
Oh,
So we
wow.
are looking at what scenarios do we include, which most likely a lot of those are going to be down near St. Lo, which will be after the 13th of June, so that we
Really?
have the ability to have additional scenarios. But the campaign will be the standard so that you can link all three games together into a campaign game. Um, but again, and it'll be probably something similar to Sword Juno Gold, where you have what they call connecting roads that have to be cleared before the Allies can advance further, which allows the Germans the ability to actually form a defense and not be steamrolled by a very aggressive player. Because if you look at the historical piece, one on Omaha, you just got your nose bloodied badly. So they weren't itching to move forward quickly. Granted, some of the leaders wanted them to, but they also didn't know what was in front of them. If they had known there were no Germans, they probably would have advanced an awful lot faster.
Okay.
The game does not give the ability to do the intelligence and the reconnaissance and things like that. So
Yeah.
we've got to artificially set the conditions to keep that more historical. I think that's going to be one of the major design aspects of Omaha that we've got to figure out. And a lot of that's probably going to be figured out in playtesting.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So, and I assume in that one will be, to me, this will be a big challenge too, is designing the connecting scenarios.
Right.
I mean, to me, that's
Yep.
going to be a bear.
Yes.
That'll be your Omaha.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's yeah. Yeah, and how they are going to work together, because yes, Sword Juno Gold was designed many years ago. I mean, it's still the same system,
Yes.
but there's been some refinements and thoughts, and Joe's involved, you're involved, others. So that's interesting. So let's
One of the
oh,
one of the nice things so far with Utah, everything that we did that changed the rules for Sword Juno Gold or modified them, even if it's the airborne rules, the drift rules for the naval invasions, if they've been changed, can retested Sword Juno Gold to make sure it was retrofittable. So
hmm,
it's up to the players if they want to use the Utah version to use even the Utah airborne rules, which are significantly different. Significantly, there are more modifiers and more requirements to bring people back. Those are still doable, and they do not break Sword Juno Gold. We did go and play test that to make sure that that
really?
would not affect it. Or you can use it out of the box and play it the way it's designed as a game by itself. That's up to the players.
What speaking of the combined game, like what's the thing? I mean, they're how will they impact each other? Because it almost seems like there's such different games that you don't even need to do it. Like what, like you said, yeah. So you understand what I'm getting at? Like,
Yes, in a lot of ways, they can be played independently. They can be played independently if you don't have the right size area. Like the convention you were at, I doubt you would be able to put up a 20-foot table, which is what you will most likely need for all three games connected. But you
okay.
could probably put up three 6 to 7 foot areas and probably play them fine. Now, I don't know that I'm designing it to be done independently. I'm going to design it to be done as one, but it doesn't mean that players can't separate them and play them independently.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is there a way that, so like we just played Crete, right? And the kind of an
Right.
interesting thing about Crete is that you're spread out, but it's one division over like all these maps. So they have to share the resources. You don't have that here. Utah's Utah. Almost, I mean, they're kind of separate. I mean, can the Germans go over to the other map? I mean, is there anything like that? Like,
There are some restrictions in Sword Juno Gold on deployment areas for the German divisions, which
yeah,
keeps them a little bit more historical.
right, which is good. I
There
like that.
will be, honestly, with Utah, there was no need to do that because it's kind of an isolated portion. And until the 13th of June, wasn't connected to Omaha. So we're almost self contained. So I didn't need to build that into the design for Utah. With Omaha, there's probably going to be some of that. The question is it going to be enough that it makes a difference and you have to build it into the game, or will the game just by the standard play, allow that to occur naturally.
Okay. This kind of ties into a question I have is, are there any battles scenarios that you would like kind of, well, no, I'm not going to restrict you, that you would like to see in the system besides the finishing the Normandy one, and not even that you'd have to design them, but like you're just, oh man, I really wish.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm relieving you of that duty. Mike and Ty can do it. So anyway, you get what I'm asking. Any battles that you're like, man, I wish this was covered. I hope someone designs that someday. Or anybody in the comments, please answer that question too. Someone.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what other people have to say. I at one point in time was interested in a sea lion just because it's another invasion that doesn't get a lot of interest.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But having gone through the design phase and knowing I'm getting ready to go through it again, I'm not signing up for that. But if anyone else wants to do that, I'd gladly help. I do have a friend that's one of the play testers that is working on now I'm drawing a blank. Salerno. I kept wanting to say Anzio, and I knew that wasn't it. He's working on a Salerno version that I don't know if that's ever going to make it to fruition, but he has been putting an awful lot of effort into building a Salerno invasion game.
Okay.
I would like to see Sicily. I don't know if it would do that well, but that's based on the fact that my grandfather was in Sicily. So okay. I kind of have a vested interest.
Yeah, I was wondering about Sicily too, because it's just kind of natural. I mean, semi, an invasion and all that. Okay. Again, commenters, I think they've been throwing. So any other projects that you're besides Omaha that you're kind of, that you think, oh, yeah, I might actually do that design someday? Is it too far out or anything like that?
That I would do? Probably not.
How about continuing? How about
other people would do?
Battle? How about Cobra?
There are possibilities there. I mean, the whole Cherbourg piece is not included in this game, and that would not add very much in scope. And there's a whole bunch, and like I mentioned for Omaha, there's probably going to be multiple scenarios around St. Lo. I don't know if it's going to go all the way that far. But there were a lot of fights north of St. Lo in the forests around there that was really where the Germans finally started forming a defense. But that also leads to almost 2 months later when you finally start the breakout.
Well, that's what I was wondering.
So there's a lot of time in there to fight over the same terrain. You would just need different counters for different units that have been added to the mix, which does give it some flexibility. What I don't know is how good the GTS series would go on a long-term perspective. If you get more than 9 or 10 days, I'm not certain the system can handle, because it doesn't have the supply. It doesn't have the reinforce or the replacements. A lot of that stuff would have to be designed for this system that doesn't currently exist. So it's great for a short period of time, a 10-day or less. It does a very good job of that. I just don't know off the top of my head if it would be capable of handling a larger, longer scale. Although if you built it, I would definitely play it. That's me.
Yeah, I mean, do you think there's any future for more Counter-Strike type of games?
I know Joe has talked about, I know at one point he had a Guadalcanal version. I don't know what the status of that is.
I would get Scott excited, maybe.
I know he was talking about an Eastern Front at one point. He had a specific battle that he had found that I think was fairly small scale. But again, I know very little about that, so you'd really have to talk to him about those.
Well, I think if Joe's willing, I should get him on here. If you think he'd be, I need to see if I can get him on here, because we could just talk about Counter-Strike, since it's available and affordable.
Yep.
I would love to see France, early war France. I think that'd be fun. Psalm and some of that stuff. Let's see here. So we got Cherbourg would be nice, icing on the cake. Yep, I love it. I love icing. North Bulge, Piper. Yeah. Race to the Best Stone is just like one little part of it, really. It'd be cool to see
I
some
would
more.
love to see the North Bulge. Again, although my grandfather wasn't there, he'd already been injured and left the 82nd. But just with the 82nd history, I think that's a portion of the bulge that does not get a lot of attention.
All right. So my last question to you is, well, I already know the answer to. Well, I have two questions. Would you do this again? The answer is yes. You're getting ready to do it again with Omaha. I mean, it's not like you're just jumping right into it, honestly, frankly. But so what does someone do if they really seriously think they'd want to design this? Like what is it? I mean, am I in for 8 to 10 years? You know, that kind of that.
I guess it depends on the scope of the game that you're looking to design.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the
How does one start? Like what? How would I like? Who would they?
um, talking to some of the designers, I think would be a good place to start and get a feel for just what you're getting in for. Because again, I honestly had no idea what I was getting in for when I
Okay.
took this on. Um, but it was a dream of mine to have Normandy in total. And so I didn't want to see that go away just because the original designer, parted ways with MMP.
Okay.
Uh, so uh, there was a burning desire to keep this going for me, and that obviously helped. It did not overcome any of the challenges that I had no idea I was getting in for, but it definitely kept me going in some of those times where I was like, "This doesn't look like it's working."
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But again, this is also a monster game, so
Well, right. I
you're
mean,
you're not signing up for something small, and you know that up front. But if you do something small, it's probably much more manageable. That's just you can ask my wife. That's not how I behave. I generally jump straight into the campaign and go all in.
yeah. Interesting. Um, yeah. So thank you so much. I kind of highlighted and circled or whatever my notes of things that we could talk about in the future. I sure appreciate you coming on. Any final words? Anything else you want to say before we say goodbye to all the lovely people here?
Well, just a couple of things, and you already mentioned it. Really just want to take the moment to thank those who actually fought this fight and set the conditions, both for us to have a hobby, but also for us to be able to enjoy our freedoms and our hobbies. We can never thank them enough. I also want to thank especially the playtesters that are on, that were instrumental in getting this game across the finish line. Most of them have been there almost as long as I have. Mike has been there, and I think Bill's been there longer than I have actually. But working with me specifically, um, they made it a lot easier for me to get the game where it is now. And then Todd, I also want to thank you for doing this, especially doing it today. That just, as you mentioned, that's just perfect timing.
Yeah. It's awesome.
I really appreciate it and appreciate the time. And if you ever want to talk about Normandy in general or GTS, I'm always willing.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Tom. So thank you all for jumping on. I appreciate it. Now, again, 1 to 2 weeks. We don't really know. This is still on pre-order. I don't know if we've changed any minds. I feel like we got a lot of church members, for lack of a better word, on this chat. Maybe a couple that aren't, but it's, again, I know it's a hefty investment money-wise in a hobby, in a limited budget type of situation, but there's a lot of game here in this system, replayable like crazy because of the chit pull and just because it takes a lot to understand how to play it well. Like I feel like I know the rules generally, but how to play well, there's no, I know some of these guys would just curb stomp me here. That's probably not a good term. Anyway, stomp me. So anywho, thank you all for joining. Tom for being on here. MMP for, producing the game here in the next few weeks. So get your pre-order in or try Counter-Strike or some of the other games. There's others available still at MMP. So if you're interested. So that's that. Thank you all. That's recorded and it'll be posted. So whoever said Scott, I think, go watch the first half when it posts up and you can see all the lovely things we talked about. I hate this game. When are we playing again? That's great, Ryan. I like that. I hate this game. When are we playing again? Yeah, I felt like that sometimes when I was playing Crete, rolling a lot of whatever I was rolling, 9s at the wrong time. All right, that's it. Thanks all. We'll see you next time.